Welcome to Adventures in Contracting. I am Leona Charles, CEO of SPC Business Consulting, where we do all things government contracts.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vivica Brooks, and I am the founder and president of the Brooks Group, also known as TVG Trains, where we work with individuals preparing them for wow, the world of work.
So, last episode, we talked a little bit about some of the resources that are available at Howard to help small businesses in the GovCon space to kind of navigate all of the things that they needed to do. So, what I thought would be really good this morning to talk about is pricing, right? Because it's
Oh,
like everyone's nemesis when you're doing proposals.
full disclosure, I hate pricing.
I think you're in good company, right? It's not my favorite thing either, but I do understand. I do understand why it's needed and why it's necessary. So I think what I wanted to start out with is how the government looks at it, and then we could back into the one serious issues that GovCons have when trying to determine it, and two, what we should be looking for when we're doing it. So when you get a bid, you're putting a proposal together, you're going to send it to the government. The government is really looking at it from one of two ways. They're looking at it from risk and they're looking at it from reasonableness, right? So you put together a bid, and the government, before this bid even hits the street and becomes known to contractors, what the government does is they do a market value determination, or they do an independent cost estimate, or some agencies call it an independent government estimate. And basically what it is they go out and they get quotes, and they make a determination about what's a reasonable range for the government to pay for the service they offer. So even though you and I know they don't always tell us what the budget is for a contract, they know what the budget is for the
Mhm.
contract, or they know what they're willing to pay. So when companies are out here kind of doing this, doing their own thing, where they're just like throwing in everything and, and trying to inflate the prices, you need to understand that the government already has a number. They already know what the number is. And when they get all of the bids in, what they do is a second assessment to see what the market will bear, which is what a fair price is according to the people
Mhm.
that are going to do the work. So they'll take all of the responses that they get, they'll take all of the prices, and they'll create a range based on the prices that were submitted. And then they'll make an upper quadrant and a lower quadrant. And generally they try to stay in the middle, which is fair. You want good quality, but you don't want to be in the top 2% paying for it. And so contractors don't understand this. Like, they don't understand that the government is actively, continuously, always researching the prices, because one, they don't really want to pay you for it, and two, they have a fiduciary responsibility with public funds, right? They have to be responsible with the way that they're spending it, and also they've got to explain that
Mhm.
expense to someone else, and usually to Congress, who authorizes the funds. They have to say, well, this is why we paid this much money, and this is how we determined that it was a reasonable amount of money to spend. And so those are the two things that you have to keep in mind when you're putting together a proposal for the government, especially in price. So let's talk about the fun that we have creating those price proposals. Look at your face. Your
And
face is
wait,
like,
can
is
you
it
just, because I thought it was important. Right, no, but
fun?
we'll reframe it, reframe, right? And so, but wait, can you go back to what did you say the two things were? Because I think that's an important point for people to understand. So the government is looking for, you had mentioned two things.
Right. So they're looking at the risk, right? And then they're looking at the
Right.
reasonableness of what you're putting in. So think of it like when
R
you're
R.
when you're renovating your right R&R, right? Think about it when you're renovating your house, right? You're going and getting all these quotes, and the risk part is you're thinking about, has this person done this kind of work before? Do they have any complaints? Um, are they going to be able to deliver? And if something happens, do they have the kind of experience that's going to translate into a really solid supply chain, or are they going to be like last minute scrambling, calling Home Depot to say, I don't have this, can you get it to me? And that's really what the government's doing with your bids. Like,
Mhm.
they're looking at you as a company to determine how risky you are. If so, if everything just
Right.
really hits the fan, are you going to be able to stand up? And if so, is that going to cost the government more money, or are you going to be able to handle that? And so that's where the risk assessment's coming
And
in.
that's what the government calls past performance.
Yes, yes. And so your reasonableness is just, are you being reasonable? This is a really simple
Mhm.
concept that I think a lot of contractors make complicated, because the very simplest way to look at it is to say, okay, all think about it, Occam's razor, right? All things being equal, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. If four
Right.
vendors all do the same thing, if all of them are charging $150 an hour and I come in at 300, the simplest explanation is I'm overpriced. That's the simplest explanation. So while you can't build prices
Okay.
based on other people, you have to be within a range, right? Because it's unless you're like you got like backup singers and you're like filling out the Capital One Arena, right? There's no reason for you to be charging, twice what your competitors are charging, unless you've got some special sauce. You have to have the special sauce to
Right, and I
justify.
think that, and I think, see, and I think that's where pricing kind of makes me all like, oh wow, right? Because from the standpoint of, I think when you're dealing with products, I think it's easier to price. It
Right.
costs me this much to make this quiche. This is the labor. This is the cost. This is the packaging. Blah blah blah. Right, and so it's right there. But when you're talking about services, it's much more it's much more vague and ambiguous, because from the standpoint
Yeah.
of, because you do think about that, right? So when you're thinking about, okay, like I'm bringing in, backup singers, I'm on this stage and all these things, so people are really going to get this full compliment versus,
Yeah.
here's one person doing one thing. You know what I mean? So that's why I think with pricing, and just
Right.
with me, us delivering service, I think it is harder to
Hmm.
price.
Right. And you make a good point, and I want to hit on that. So I talked a little bit about the special sauce. So I think in
Okay.
services, this is where special sauce becomes very important, because you're right. When you're providing a product, like a software, or you're going out there and painting a wall, you can really easily create unit prices for things, right? But when you're
Right.
training or when you're consulting, it's very hard, because your product is your knowledge, and it's very hard to measure that. And then there are degrees of knowledge, right? There are some people that are like super experts that
Mhm.
like can rattle off regulations at the top of their head, and like people that are in the construction industry, the permit people that can tell you this is how it goes. These are the people in the office, and they're just like super, super plugged in. And so you're going to pay a premium because they know the tricks, and they know the shortcuts. They know any kind of little holes you can go through. But when you're bringing those backup dancers in, and you've got the lights, what you need to know is that there has to be some kind of
Mhm.
basis in reality, right? So either you have to have been
Okay.
able to back it up to say, yeah, this is my special sauce, and I'm charging you for the dancers and the travel and the lights and the hair and makeup, but here's why. I, worked in an overseas consulate providing this exact same training to an organization of the exact same size, with people who were at the upper echelons of government, right? So, which gives you rightly a very different perspective and a very different way to provide those
Mhm.
services than someone who, say, has provided these services to a group of professionals, right? They're very different. It's very nuanced, but they are very different. The delivery is different, the presentation's different, and also the accountability is different, because when you're, say, like, for instance, when I worked at a utility and I had to do hearings, they were televised. I was, in the
Mhm.
hot seat. People, commissioners were throwing questions at me, rapid fire, one after the other. I had to defend numbers. I had to defend what was being spent. I had to defend our procurement processes. And that is a very different skill set than someone who gets up and does death by PowerPoint, right? Um, and you
Mhm.
have to be able
Right.
to.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Like, and I think that's a perfect example, right? Because, it's like every numerous people can throw concerts. I like the little concert analogy. We're going to just keep rolling with it, right? So I can go see, I already knew I don't mind paying for a Michael Jackson concert because I know I'm going to be entertained from start to
Right.
finish, right? You've
Right.
worked out every nuance. You've honed your craft. I mean, even so much so that you've looked and seen, if someone's sitting over here, how can I make sure that they have the best show experience, just like somebody sitting front row? And so I think that
Mhm.
if you're a service provider and you hone your craft like that, then that's where the pricing gets tricky, right? Because you've got people, like you said, death by PowerPoint, and it's just kind of like, concert, $10. Okay, then we got a concert over here for like $100, but it's like how, but you wouldn't know that until you experience it, right? That's one thing, like I've always said,
Exactly.
Saturdays, everybody knows you can find me at Costco eating my way through, right? Because it's like, yay, samples, okay? Because they have an actual product. So it's already built in. You're like, I tasted it,
Right.
it's good, I'll buy it. But when you're in service, it's hard to do that because it's like, unless we're just going
Right.
and doing them for free, then it's like, why are people gonna, you see what I'm saying? Like, how do you, so I guess that's my
Yeah.
question, right? With the RRs, risk versus reasonableness, and then also taking into
Mhm.
account knowing your value.
Which is a great point, right? How do you do that? Because you hear it a lot. You hear people say you've got to be you got to know your value. You can't set a price and expect people to value if you don't understand it, right? Which is a valid point. However, nobody ever tells you how to do it. Nobody says, but this is how you do it. So this is how you do it, right?
Okay.
There are two sets of things you need to consider, right, when you're setting your value. And one is your fixed costs, right? These are going to be things that happen no matter what, whether you make a dime or you don't. These are things that you have to pay for. So you need to make the money for them, right? And then you're going to have your variable costs, which are going to be things that are going to, as the name implies, change based on the project that you're working on. So they're not always going to be there. Sometimes they're going to be more, sometimes they're going to be less. But what you as a GovCon vendor have to have a firm handle on are your fixed costs. You have to know without a doubt how much money you need to make every day to break even. And then, and only then, can you start to determine what your profit margin is, which is going to set your value, right? That's where your special sauce comes in, right? That's where all your unique training, your unique partnerships, your different perspective or unique ability to solve problems, that's where that comes in. But I think where we see a lot of the issue is that small businesses come in here like Shark Tank and they're like, listen, I have been working for 25 years. I know this stuff. So you're going to pay me top dollar. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. You've been working with somebody else fielding the problems and only having to worry about yourself for 25 years. You are not ready for this. And people get offended, but it's the truth. You're not ready, right? You have to figure out, and that might mean that for a few projects, you've got to depress costs because you're trying to figure out where you are, what makes sense to you. You don't know how much things cost because you haven't done it before. So I think there has to be a healthy dose of humility, right? You can't say, well, I was talking to this person and they run the same kind of company and this is their cost. It's like I grew up in the South, right? We always say don't, um get your house in order. Don't throw people in glass houses, right? It's this kind of thing. You don't know what's going on under someone else's roof. You don't know all of their expenses. You don't know how little or how much they train their people. You don't know how technical they are or not. You don't know what their strategy for growth is. So you can't base your cost and your pricing off of another company. Unfortunately, this is going to be
Mhm.
a very long, very tedious exercise for you because you have to get it right. It is the building block of everything in your company. It is the only measure of success that you should be worried about. It's whether or not you are making money above and beyond your cost, because that is the only way you are truly successful, right? So you have to sit down and figure out, okay, this is my mortgage. This is my insurance. These are my taxes. these are my utilities. This is my phone bill. This is my internet bill. Things that are static. You've got to start a running list. Do I have to pay if you're a lawyer? These are my costs for the bar. These are my professional development costs. Like for me,
Mhm.
I have to have so many different types of insurance, right? I have to have E&O, I have to have unemployment, I have to have cyber, I have to there's so many of them. I just see the bills and cry, right? There's just a lot of them. And I have to take that into account with, even, okay, now I have to go on to my taxes and I have to do the estimated taxes, I have to do taxes for registrations and all of these things that I know come every year that I have to put out. Those are fixed costs. And I've got to break
Right.
them down into
Mhm.
monthly costs so I know what's going on. Um,
And I think it's
and
good
then,
for people to, you were kind of rattling off those fixed costs. And I think it's good for
mhm,
people to put a spreadsheet together. I know we had talked, some time ago about, small businesses and how do you set yourself up for a success. And one of those things is get
yes.
that spreadsheet in line, or QuickBooks. I love QuickBooks. Um, and start putting those things in there. So, and then, because as you have to, like you
Yeah,
said, like we have to carry cyber security insurance now. We didn't used to have to carry that, but now we have to carry it. Okay, so let's add that, another line item that we have to add. And so that's part of that fixed cost, because I think, you're definitely giving out some great information, but I didn't want people to lose the fact that, as you're listing off these different, they're giving us a definite fixed cost versus variable cost, but also remembering, okay, where is a place where I can put this information so that it can be updated and also, reviewed.
right. And here's the thing, it doesn't need to be complicated. Like you don't need some fancy,
Yeah.
$200,000 financial system, right? You can start on Word and make your own table, however you have to put it together, just so long as you have a running tally of what these things are. Start. I
Mm.
love Excel. I think people, don't give it enough credit where it's due. It's a really, really powerful program, and it lets you
Yeah.
sift through a lot of information. And so I'm like, why are you paying for that? Do you get it Excel when you buy a computer and you put Word on there, so just use it. It's free. You already have it, right? Set up all the stuff there, and it's just the key is you just got to start tracking stuff. And this is what trips up a lot of small businesses.
Right.
We don't track anything, right? We just kind of live in the moment and we're
Yeah.
like, oh, we're gonna submit a bid for that. What we ought to be doing is for every bid that we're submitting, we ought to have a pricing sheet that we are going back to and saying, okay, this is what we're going to use to build a template, right? We've determined that for this type of
Hmm.
work, it's going to take this amount of hours, it's going to take this amount of people, and this is the estimated labor hours it's going to cost us. We know that
Right.
the variables to it will change. We may need equipment, we may not need equipment, whatever. Those things are going to change, but we need to start building templates. When take for instance when we put together proposals, right? We look at how much work is going to be involved in, and about we sit down and we estimate based on the tasks that are listed how many hours that's going to take us to do something. And then we look at those hours and say, okay,
Right.
how many of these hours can be done by somebody junior, right? That is going to cost less, right? So that we can fit it into whatever budget we've decided for the hours that it's going to take to complete it. So we then know that we now have to back into that particular figure. We know that okay, we need to figure out who's going to do these tasks and at what rate, and will that come to that figure? Because that rate that we've determined based on the hours that we know a project like this will cost, that's our reasonableness. And that's something that we can defend to the government when they say, why is this so hard? And we say, well, it's
Right.
easy. We had to bring in the backup singers because something of this magnitude, this is a big crowd. They want to be wowed. So we got to bring in the backup singers, and with the
Exactly.
backup singers, we've got to bring in wardrobe changes and, the hair and makeup and the lights. And so it's that same thing. You have to know all of the ancillary costs that are going to go with it. And
Yes.
this is the thing that nobody teaches you, right? When you're doing in GovCon, you just kind of stumble on it after you get like blown out of the water on like a couple proposals. Then you're like, oh, you land one, and then all of these things that you never even knew you had to pay for, you now have to pay for. And that's kind of how you figure out pricing, right? Which is a terrible way to do it. But it's the school of hard knocks in GovCon and pricing. So one of the biggest shocks I think is the reasonableness. Because people have this conception that
Right.
the government just spends money. And in some cases they do, but by and large, they don't. By and large, there is a group of people like me who have done this for a long time who can eyeball a bid and go, no, what is that? That does not seem right. These are the rates you're looking at, and we'll go and look and say they are so far above market. Why is that like that? It's not a free for all. It's not free money, and it's not, certainly, as a contracts person, I would tell you, I am always, and was always when I was on the government side, taken aback and personally offended when someone tried to submit a bid that was inflated for no reason. That
But
was
was
just
it inflated, or were they just saying, okay, this is like reasonable in their mind?
in their people think they're great in their mind all the time, right? That does not make it reasonable. That
Hmm.
just means that you think you're
Okay.
wonderful, which is fine, but it was inflated. A lot of times they're inflated, and the government,
Okay.
the funny thing is that the government allows you to inflate to a reason, right? They allow G&A, they allow overhead, like, they allow fully loaded rates, which allows you to put in all of your line item um areas, because the government does get that there are expenses for the private sector that the government doesn't have. So they allow you to build in, when they say a fully loaded rate, the government is serious about that fully loaded rate. Like, they're like, throw everything in the kitchen sink in that rate, because after that rate, you're not getting anything else. It's over, right? It's just like when your mom
Yes,
says, that's it,
exactly. And
you
that's
hit
why I
the
thought it
line.
was so important to know your fixed cost. Yeah. And
Mhm.
that's why I thought it was so important to know the fixed cost piece of it, because when you do have that fully loaded rate opportunity, then you can just quickly look here and say, okay, these are all of our our different fixed costs, and let's make sure we put that in there. Because the other caveat of it is, once you put it out there, that's it, right? And so, and you don't want to miss
You can't,
something.
yeah,
So that's why, the like you said, the tracking
you
and
can't.
having some mechanism to do that, simple or complex, whatever your world is important to have.
Right, because you can't go back. I mean, you might be able to negotiate some equitable adjustments if the government does something that is just completely out of pocket and changes everything. Then you have a path to negotiate, and it's called an equitable adjustment. But most of the time, the number that you submit is the number you get. So if you are, so now we're going to segue. It's a bad segue, but we're going to segue into something that I hate, which is the lowballing that people do to get their foot in the door.
Okay.
I hate this. It is a terrible practice. I understand that in all practicality,
Okay.
sometimes you have to do it, but here's why I hate it. When you underbid something just to get the job, what you do is you severely depress the economic circle so that everybody that comes behind you is now unable to charge a fair market rate to the government for something that you've done. Also, you make
Hmm.
sure that nobody makes a profit. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible ideal. I get it. People are like, you give them a free show, get them hooked, and next time you charge them. Except the government doesn't do that. The government is like, no, last time you gave it to me free. Why am I going to pay for it now? That's how they roll. They're like thugs for real. They don't
You're
care.
right.
So I see companies do this, and I'm like, no, no, don't do that. Charge what you're worth, what you've determined. Charge for it. And if it's high, then guess what? They're not your customer, right? Either you can go back to the drawing board and see if maybe
And I
there's
think,
some,
say that again. I think it's
if
important to say that again.
if they think you're high and you've done all of the work and it's reasonable, they are not your customer. That is a hard truth to swallow, right? But it is the truth
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
your only option is to go back and say, okay, I can take out two backup dancers and I can take out two lights, and this is what I can give you if you need this price. But
Yes.
if you want
Yes.
the whole show, this is what it costs, right? And it doesn't
Yes.
change.
And I think that's why you have like the tiers, right? It's just like,
Hmm.
when you go to hotel brands and you've got Ritz Carlton, St. Regis, then you've got, uh, hotels and suites, Marriott hotels and suites. Then if you have like Town Place Suites or Fairfield Inn, so it's like you can decide which tier it is. It's all four walls and a
Yeah.
bed. It's really what it is. But it's like, oh, do I want this? Or do I want, so there's different things that are added into it. And so I think it's important to say and own it from the standpoint of you're not my customer. Because the other thing that comes to mind for me is
Right.
like jewelry, right? When we think about Tiffany's, or, so you've got
Uh-huh.
Tiffany's, you've got K's, you've got Jared's. I mean, you've got everything, so whether you're trying to bedazzle them with a beautiful box or, you know, hey girl, I don't know, but I'm just saying from the standpoint of, I just think it's important for people to understand, like, everyone is not your customer. And I think as part of pricing, that
Yeah.
it's important to understand in pricing who is your customer. Are you making luxury
Yes.
Belgium chocolates where, people are going to pay $4 for a nougat, or are you trying to mass produce and be at,
Right.
every
Right.
checkout aisle or what have you?
That is a excellent point because this is so true, right? We never know what lane we're in. We never know. Like we're as small businesses, we're like, I just need to make the invoice because the invoice is an invoice, and to some degree that's true. But you do need to know, where's your lane, right?
Yeah.
I know where my lane is. I know that I'm expensive, but I also know that I'm not booze and I'm not Mackenzie, right? And that's not where I'm aiming to be. But I also am not aiming to be like Kumon. Like that's not my goal, right? My goal is, I'm probably like in the upper middle where you're paying and you understand that you need expertise, but it doesn't need to be exclusive, right? It just needs to be that you understand you're paying for value and that's what you will get. But I'm not going to be, it's not an exclusivity factor. That's not what I'm going for. That's not what my brand is. My brand is about giving you the knowledge and helping you navigate, all of these ever changing rules. And some people are like, they want to operate at the McDonald's level, like in terms of quality and speed, but they want to charge, like Ruth Chris. And I don't understand that. Like, but those don't match. Like, you can't do that. Like, you can't
Yeah.
provide McDonald's service at Ruth Chris prices. Like, that's not, come on, man. You can't do that. But that is a lot of what we see in small businesses. So
Okay.
this
Yeah,
is
and no, and
this
I
is
think that's
good.
good because I know my takeaway is definitely the R&R. So the risk
Mhm,
and reasonableness. I like the way you said that. And I like the way it's interchangeable. It's not just, what's the risk and reasonableness the government is looking for, but then it also gives us an opportunity as small business owners to say what are our risk and what's reasonable, which filters into
mhm.
that deeper conversation about who is our market. Who's our market?
Yes.
And who's our customer,
Yes.
and who are we going after? I
So I
like it.
think my takeaway is going to be
See, I feel better about
my takeaway is
pricing.
going to be what you said. I'm glad I've done something helpful for you. It's not a terrible thing. It's not a prison sentence.
Right.
But from you, I like the know your customer, right? Know your lane. That's
Right.
my takeaway from it because it's such a simple but powerful thing. Most people don't understand it, and the way that you explained it is so good. Just know your lane and know who you are in the service you're providing. So that is definitely my takeaway. So with that, I am aware of the time, and thank you guys for listening to us. And as always, Vivica, thank you for a wonderful discussion.
Absolutely.
So we will see you next time.